In the 16th chapter of Ezekiel, God's chosen tribe, Israel, is portrayed in an amazing relationship with her Creator. She is Jehovah's unique bride among the nations. We are told that Jehovah, who is actually Jesus, chose Israel alone among the nations to become his spiritual wife, to have spiritual relations with him. Yet this passage goes on to describe how Israel prostituted that relationship. She became a spiritual harlot by worshiping other gods. In no less than 86 clear passages in the Old Testament, Israel is pointedly described as a whore. In fact, having been the first to marry God, she became the mother of spiritual harlots. Although many religious systems throughout history have turned their backs on Christ to become spiritual harlots, only apostate Israel is the mother of the principle of spiritual whoredom. Only apostate Israel has Mother of Harlots branded on her forehead forever.
Throughout the Old Testament period, Christ tried to persuade his harlot bride to return to him. Finally, he came to earth in one last effort to reconcile her. Her response? She had him crucified. So ended the marriage of Christ to Israel. He divorced her and chose a bride composed of believing Jews and Gentiles. After the mother of harlots was divorced from her husband, she became enraged at his new bride, the early church. The book of Acts tells how Jews ruthlessly persecuted and attempted to destroy the church. Yet soon after rebelling against Rome, first in 70 A.D., then in 132 A.D., the harlot herself was persecuted by the Romans and cast out of her promised land. For the next 1,000 years, Jews dwelt in Babylon, absorbing its witchcraft and occultry. In fact, no other nation, except the modern Iraqis, have lived longer in Babylon than the harlot Israel. From the exile of Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC to their expulsion from Babylon in the 11th century AD, the majority of Jews lived in Babylon for 1,600 years, longer than they had lived in Palestine. In Babylon, the Pharisees, who had become the uncontested spiritual leaders of the Jews, incorporated many Babylonian perversions into their new anti-Bible, the Babylonian Talmud. In the Talmud, the mother of harlots turned upside down literally everything her ex-husband Jesus had taught her. In the book of Deuteronomy, God warns the Hebrews that if they rejected him, they would become cursed above all nations. Eventually, they not only rejected his law, but crucified the giver of that law. As a result, the Jewish people have been led into a dark and waterless pit of spiritual confusion called the Talmud. For the last 2,000 years, there they have remained under the spiritual authority of the Pharisees, those who masterminded the death of Jesus. 2 millennia of such spiritual darkness is proof that the ancient curse in Deuteronomy still lies heavily on the Jews.
In my book, Israel, Our Duty, Our Dilemma, I detail how Judaism was corrupted by the occult and immoral practices of Babylon. Let's touch very briefly on just one aspect of such depravity, pederasty, or the sexual molestation of children. Today, the greatest rabbis of the Talmud would be locked up as child molesters. Pederasty was deeply entrenched among the most respected Talmudic rabbis. It was taken for granted that the local rabbi could acquire a baby girl at 3 years of age as his sex toy simply by raping her. Here are several passages from many in the Talmud granting such permission. In Nida 45b, a woman asks, "Master, at what age may a woman marry?" "At the age of 3 years and 1 day, he told her. A girl of 3 years and 1 day may be betrothed by intercourse. Rabbi Joseph said, "Come and hear. A maiden of 3 years old and a day may be acquired in marriage by coition. When a grown-up man has intercourse with a little girl, it is nothing." The footnote to this passage says, Tears come to the eye again and again. So does virginity come back to the little girl under 3 years. Although the Talmud forbids homosexuality among adult Jews, sodomy with small boys is permitted. Leviticus 20:13 forbids sexual relations between men. The Talmud, however, defines a boy under 9 years of age as a minor, not a man. He is excluded from the biblical prohibition. Since the boy is not sexually mature, the Talmud teaches, he cannot throw guilt upon the rabbi who rapes him. Only he who is able to engage in sexual intercourse may throw guilt upon the active offender, whilst he who is unable to engage in sexual intercourse cannot.
It is significant that the pederasty we have mentioned is endorsed by the very greatest rabbis of the Talmud. These include Rabbi ben Zakkai, Rabbi ben Yohai, and Rabbi Akiba. Christ accused the Pharisees of all uncleanness. This may have included child sex.
It is because of such unbelievable darkness and immorality, largely absorbed from 1600 years in Babylon, that the book of Revelation gave a new name to the harlot of the Old Testament. She is now called Babylon the Great, Mother of Harlots and Abominations of the earth. Her chief city, Jerusalem, is also referred to from heaven, not as Jerusalem, but as Sodom in Egypt, a term denoting sexual vice and bondage. In the 11th century A.D., the inhabitants of Babylon expelled the Jews once again. The mother of harlots, Israel, was forced to wander among the nations. After the harlot was expelled from Babylon, she was forced to enter the Western and ultimately the modern world. Yet she was full of purpose and revenge. Before her rebellion, she possessed the respectability of a married woman, with a lavish house and city to dwell in. Yet now, having been cast out, she vowed she would return to her house and lands, her temple and capital city, Jerusalem. Once secure in her land, she would find another husband who hated Jesus as much as she did. Together, they would mock Jesus by ruling the world from Jerusalem. With this great and sinister goal in mind, the harlot conceived an intricate and very long-range plan to corrupt Christ's new bride, the church, and weaken the nations. She planned to so deceive and corrupt humanity that ultimately she and her false husband might assume control of the nations. During this medieval period, mystical rabbis, children of the harlot, perfectly expressed their mother's plan for world dominion. They recorded her intentions in the Zohar, also called Kabbalah. Today, religious Jews consider the Zohar to be as inspired as the Talmud. Most ultra-Orthodox Jews consider it even more inspired. Quoting the Zohar, Rabbi Jehuda said to him, Rabbi Chezkiah, "He is to be praised who is able to free himself from the enemies of Israel, and the just are much to be praised to get free from them and fight against them." Rabbi Chezkiah asked, "How must we fight against them?" Rabbi Jehuda said, "By wise counsel thou shalt war against them." By what kind of war? The kind of war that every son of man must war against his enemies, which Jacob used against Esau, by deceit and trickery wherever possible. They must be fought against without ceasing until proper order be restored. Thus it is with satisfaction that I say we should free ourselves from them and rule over them. Because the harlot's children were gifted merchants, she sent them forth as moneylenders. During the Middle Ages and Renaissance, her children became usurers, not only to the people of Europe, but to kings. As a result, she gained fabulous wealth. She created a network of banking houses, including the Rothschilds, Warburgs, and Schiffs. The eminent British historian Nesta Webster, in her many books which were publicly praised by Winston Churchill, described how Jews made use of secret societies. Freemasonry and the Illuminati were secret, yet incredibly organized anti-Christian organizations attempting to subvert Christian society. Through incredible organization and intrigue, they sought to establish their own New World Order. Although primarily composed of Gentiles, Jewish agents of the harlot were able to manipulate these secret societies to the harlot's own ends. With the assistance of Freemasonry and the Illuminati, the harlot's children sowed discord. This not only helped bring down the French monarchy, but largely destroyed the power of the Catholic Church in France. In 1785 in Germany, a courier for the Bavarian Illuminati was killed when a lightning bolt struck him. When local police went through his bags, they found incredibly detailed evidence of how the Illuminati had infiltrated all German universities during the latter 18th century. Through invention of so-called higher criticism of the Bible, the Illuminati eroded faith in the land of Luther. This paved the way for the rise of Hegel, Nietzsche, and Nazism. But it was through communism that the harlot most impacted the modern world. Jewish revolutionaries masterminded and led the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Such Jewish overthrow of the Tsar and conquest of Russia was funded by the Jewish banking house of Kuhn-Loeb in New York and by the Rothschilds and Warburgs in Europe. The Encyclopedia Judaica tells us the communist movement and ideology played an important part in Jewish life. Individual Jews played an important role in the early stages of Bolshevism and the Soviet regime. The great attraction of communism among Russian and later also Western Jewry emerged only with the establishment of the Soviet regime in Russia. Communism and support of the Soviet Union thus seemed to many Jews to be the only alternative, and communist trends became widespread in virtually all Jewish communities. During this period, intelligence services of the Western powers were abuzz with reports of Jewish control of the Bolshevik Revolution. American intelligence from Siberia reported that of 384 commissars, more than 300 were Jews. The Bolshevik movement is and has been, since its beginning, guided and controlled by Russian Jews. Jews predominate in local Soviet government, anti-Jewish feeling growing among population. 50% of Soviet government in each town consists of Jews. British intelligence reveals the same pattern. There is now definite evidence that Bolshevism is an international movement controlled by Jews. Bolshevik leaders did not represent Russian working classes, most of them being Jews. And Dutch intelligence. Bolshevism is organized and worked by Jews who have no nationality and whose one object is to destroy for their own ends the existing order of things. Here is a photo of the first People's Commissariat. From left to right are Uritsky, Trotsky, Zinoviev, Sverdlov, Kaganovich, all Jewish. Sir Winston Churchill, writing in the Illustrated Sunday Herald of February 8, 1920, sums up the Jewish creation of communism. There is no need to exaggerate the part played in the creation of Bolshevism and in the actual bringing about of the Russian Revolution by these international and for the most part atheistical Jews. It is certainly a very great one. With the notable exception of Lenin, the majority of the leading figures are Jews. Quoting the American Hebrew of September 8, 1920, "The Bolshevist revolution in Russia was the work of Jewish brains, of Jewish dissatisfaction, of Jewish planning, whose goal is to create a new order in the world. What was performed in so excellent a way in Russia, thanks to Jewish brains and because of Jewish dissatisfaction, and by Jewish planning, shall also become a reality all over the world." As a result, in Russia and China alone, not to mention such communist countries as Cuba and Cambodia, at least 186 million people were killed, millions of whom were Christians. The great harlot has become drunk with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. In the years that followed the Bolshevik victory, through all forms of liberalism, socialism, and Marxism, the children of the great harlot worked feverishly to break down faith in Jesus Christ and the moral values he taught.